Donald Trump campaigned on a promise to end the Ukraine war quickly. He said this week that negotiation with Russia will start immediately, after holding what he called a highly productive call with Putin. The financial market was impressed. Ukraine's dollar bonds and the euro rallied, while oil futures and defense contractors sold off. But how close are we actually to a deal? How soon can we realistically expect the war to end? How should you be investing your money right now? Trump had promised to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours. My question is why it took him so long before he even spoke to Putin. Was it because he didn't want to risk the confirmation of Tulsi Gabbard, his nomination for Director of National Intelligence, who has been branded by her detractors as pro-Russia? Or was it because Trump realized only after the election that ending the war won't be quite as easy as he might have thought? Whatever was the reason, there was no breakthrough that I can see, at least based on what Trump said after his call with Putin. We learned nothing new about his plan to end the war. The fact that he said that it is not practical for Ukraine to join NATO is not new. Nor is the suggestion this week by Pete Hegseth, Trump's newly confirmed Secretary of Defense, that it is unrealistic for Ukraine to recover all of the territory that it has lost to Russia in this war. If there's anything new at all, it is that Trump seems genuinely excited about Zelensky's proposal to exchange Ukraine's natural resources for American aid.
We're going to have all this money in there, and I say, I want it back. And I told them that I want the equivalent, like $500 billion worth of rare earth, and they've essentially agreed to do that. So at least we don't feel stupid.
I can only think of two possible explanations for Trump's sudden interest in Zelensky's offer. One, Trump no longer believes he can end the war quickly, and he wants to get something in return for continued American aid. Two, Trump is using the deal to pressure Russia into stopping the war. If the U.S. acquires a claim on Ukrainian resources, then Russian aggression could be viewed as impinging on U.S. interest. In either case, I think it is premature to think that Trump will be able to end the war quickly. The 35% betting odds on Polymarket right now that the war will end in the first 90 days of Trump's presidency strikes me as being much too high. I would give it less than a 20% chance that the war ends by the end of April. Indeed, I struggle to see the war ending before the summer. I don't doubt that negotiation will start right away, as Trump suggested on Wednesday. But the chance of a ceasefire before a broad agreement is reached is not high. This is because, one, Moscow will likely view any ceasefire as providing Ukraine with time to regroup and rearm. Putin would not make the same mistake as he did with the Minsk agreement. Two, Russia has yet to gain control over the strategically important towns of Pokrovsk, Kupiansk, Seversk, and Liman in the Donetsk region that Russia has already annexed. While Russian troops have been advancing along the eastern front, Ukrainian defense around these towns has been generally holding up so far. It is difficult to see Putin giving up his claim on these towns, despite reports of heavy Russian casualties. This is why it is a mistake to assume that he is in a hurry to agree to a ceasefire. Another consideration that will set the ceasefire even further back is the weather. Snow will start melting in March, which means deteriorating fighting conditions that will favor the Ukrainian defenders. As we learned over the past 3 years of the war, tanks run the risk of getting stuck in mud in Ukraine until late April, if not early May. What all this means is that it might take the better part of the summer for Russian forces to bring most of Donetsk, even without Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, under control. This is why it's difficult to see a ceasefire, let alone a peace deal, until late summer or even early fall. The war could end more quickly if Russian forces somehow manage to overrun the Ukrainian front line. This possibility is not high, given drone warfare has made it difficult to amass troops and equipment for launching large-scale offensive. Ukraine is ramping up mass production of drones. Kiev says it is on track to build between 2.5 to 3 million drones this year. This is almost certainly to help level the playing field in the war. What it means is that if Ukraine were to suddenly fold, it would only be because of NATO deciding to pull the plug on Zelensky. But this seems very unlikely, even if Trump were to cut US support. Europe seems quite determined to make up for any shortfall in American assistance. The new NATO chief Mark Rutte, a former Dutch prime minister, says Europe will pay for US arms for Ukraine. These were his exact words in an interview last month. If this new Trump administration is willing to keep on supplying Ukraine from its defense industrial base, the bill will be paid for by the Europeans. I'm absolutely convinced of this. We have to be willing to do that. Then there's also the German election on February 23rd. Zelensky has every reason to be rooting for the CDU-CSU alliance that is generally expected to win the most votes in the elections. Friedrich Merz, the head of the CDU and likely the next chancellor of Germany, is a Russia hawk. He has not only signaled a willingness for Europe to increase its aid to Ukraine, but he's promised to send the long-range Taurus missiles to Ukraine. He said in an election debate last week that he would have delivered them to Kiev already. The war of attrition has so far favored the Russian side, but it is not clear that this will remain the case for much longer. Given its superiority in manpower and arms, victory is still likely Russia's, but it will have to work for it. And this will take time. There's another reason why I'm not optimistic that the Ukraine war will end very soon. Trump can say no to NATO membership for Ukraine, but he will need to offer security guarantees for Ukraine to lay down its weapons. The talk of a buffer zone patrolled by British and French troops is a non-starter for Moscow. If Putin invaded Ukraine to prevent the deployment of NATO troops on Russia's border, he's very unlikely to accept it as an outcome of a war that has cost at least 100,000 Russian lives already. He will also have to think about the future after Trump. If Ukraine needs security guarantees, so does Russia. Whatever arrangement that might bring comfort to Ukraine will be likely viewed by Russia as a threat. Ukraine will see a peace agreement as an opportunity to rearm, especially if the agreement allows NATO troops into Ukraine. This is why Putin will want the negotiation to encompass the broader relationship between Russia and NATO. I have no doubt that this will be the main sticking point in the negotiation ahead. I will be happy to be proved wrong, but there is no obvious solution in sight. So what are the market implications of the negotiation in the months ahead? To the extent that there won't be a peace deal for some time, I don't see an easing on the current oil sanctions on Russia easing anytime soon. Indeed, we cannot rule out that the US and Europe might even try to tighten these sanctions if the negotiation gets stuck. Trump wants Saudi Arabia to increase oil production to pressure Putin, but I see little chance of this happening. Mohammed bin Salman is already struggling to finance his ambitious Vision 2030 plan with oil price at $75. He needs higher and not low oil price. The same could be said for the rest of the OPEC. In a way, the Ukraine war has worked out well for OPEC. MBS is unlikely to turn its back on Putin. I see the low 70s as providing strong support for oil price. I like oil, given the high likelihood of an imminent escalation of geopolitical risk in the Middle East, as I argue in an earlier video. What about the euro? Trump wants Europe to take responsibility for its own defense. In a speech at Davos last month, he called on Europe to spend 5% of its GDP on defense. And he wants Europe to buy more American defense equipment. Europe has more to lose than the US if the war in Ukraine drags on. Theoretically, Europe has an even greater incentive than the US to bring an end to the war. But European leadership, unlike the new American leadership, does not have a transactional approach to conducting its foreign policy. Europe will keep the Ukraine war going for as long as possible, even though this will only exacerbate Europe's fiscal burden and its economic stagnation. The great irony is that the US under Biden started the war in Ukraine, But it will be Europe that will keep it going and paying the ultimate price. This is undoubtedly bearish for the euro long term. What about defense contractors? Trump said last week that he has instructed Doge to turn his attention to the Pentagon, and that he expects Elon Musk to find hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud and abuse at the Pentagon during the coming audit. There's no doubt that defense spending, which accounts for half of all discretionary federal spending, is in Trump's crosshair as he embarks on his second term. Trump won't be able to rein in the out-of-control budget deficit without cutting defense spending. In my view, this is why Trump is so eager to stop the war in Ukraine. There's no doubt that the war has been a gravy train for U.S. defense contractors. Trump has been talking about building an Iron Dome, a new air defense system that can counter Russian and Chinese hypersonic missiles. Trump wants to spend less on defense and get more for it. This is not good news for U.S. defense contractors. Europe will spend more on defense, but it is not clear that it will be enough to offset any drop in the U.S. And Europeans, at least, have choices. I see Trump's disengagement from European security concerns as ultimately bearish for U.S. defense contractors. Thank you for listening.